Orthodox Survival Course by Father Seraphim and Father Podmoshensky. Lecture 7, The French Revolution, Part 2. Secret Societies. But to these two philosophical elements there is added now a third thing, which is the secret societies. Of course, the secret societies have an underground existence throughout the period before the Enlightenment, but it is especially in the 18th century that there is born a new sect, or at least a reorganized one, and that is Freemasonry, which was born in England in 1717, and very quickly spread to France and America and the rest of Europe. Later on we shall see that Freemasonry in England and in America become something rather different from Freemasonry on the continent, especially in the Catholic countries. And the reason for this is not so difficult to understand. The English mentality which gave the world already the philosophy of deism is a so-called, quote, conservative mentality. That is, it's capable of believing just about anything and being quite content, and not pushing its beliefs to any logical conclusions. Just as later on we'll see David Hume destroy the whole of the world and then sits back and enjoys himself, and drinks his coffee and smokes his pipe, not seeing that he's given ideas which will drive people to despair. In the same way, English Masonry was born out of the spirit of tolerance and seeking to find some kind of a religious belief which is neither Catholic nor Protestant, but which will bind together all men of goodwill. And they were satisfied with that. They had a deistic religion, the Grand Architect. There were no religious differences discussed in the lodge. You have to put religion behind. And for the Englishmen and later for the Americans, this was considered to be sufficient. If you believe in God, you can go to your Protestant church or your Anglican church and be happy. Section B. Illuminati. Adam. Weishaupt. Born 1748. Jesuit training, but hated them. Turned to French philosophers, Manichaeans, and occult doctrines. Quotes Webster 8-10. Very similar philosophy to Rousseau, but added secret revolutionary society. May 1st, 1776. A combination of Freemasonry and Jesuitry. The very ideas of Masonry, the ideas of a brotherhood of men, which is something above Catholicism or Protestantism. When they went to the continent, they inflamed men's minds and made them quite radical. There is in particular one kind of Freemasonry, which apparently was evolved separately, and this is what is called Illuminism. This was the creature of one man, whose name is Adam Weishaupt. He was born in 1748, went through a Jesuit education, and later on came to hate the Jesuits, turned to the French philosophers, to Manichaean philosophy, and apparently had some kind of occult initiation in one of the many occult sects. Let us examine here a few of his views. He says, in agreement with Rousseau, that civilization is a great mistake, and to this all the inequalities of human life were due. He says, man is fallen from the condition of liberty and equality, the state of pure nature. He is under subordination and evil bondage, arising from the vices of man. This is the fall and original sin. Notice he uses the Christian term here, original sin. Later on, we'll see how this all is an imitation of Christianity. According to him, all the arts and sciences must be abolished. He says, "Do the common sciences afford real enlightenment, real human happiness, or are they rather children of necessity, the complicated needs of a state contrary to nature, the inventions of vain and empty brains? Why," he asks, "should it be impossible to the human race to attain its highest perfection, the capacity for governing itself?" For this reason, he taught that not only should kings and nobles be abolished, but even a republic should not be tolerated, and the people should be taught to do without controlling authority, any law, or any civil code. In order to make this system a success, it would be necessary only to inculcate in man a just and steady morality. And since Weishaupt professed to share Rousseau's belief in the inherent goodness of human nature, this would not be difficult, and society might then go on peaceably in a state of perfect liberty and equality. For since the only real obstacle to human perfection lay in the restraints imposed on man by artificial conditions of life, the removal of these must inevitably restore him to his primitive virtue. Man is not bad except as he is made so by arbitrary morality. He is bad because religion, the state, and bad examples pervert him. It was necessary, therefore, to root out from his mind all ideas of a hereafter, all fear of retribution for evil deeds, and to substitute for these superstitions the religion of reason. When at last reason becomes the religion of men, then will the problem be solved. After deliverance from the bondage of religion, the loosening of all social ties must follow. Both family and national life must cease to exist as to make of the human race one good and happy family. The origins of patriotism and the love of kindred are thus described by Weishaupt in the directions given to his hierophants for the instruction of initiates. At the moment when men united themselves into nations, they ceased to recognize themselves under a common name. Nationalism or national love took the place of universal love. With the division of the globe and its countries' benevolence restricted itself behind boundaries that it was never again to transgress. Then it became a virtue to spread out at the expanse of those who did not happen to be under our dominion. Then, in order to attain this goal, it became permissible to despise foreigners, and to deceive and to offend them. This virtue was called patriotism. That man was called a patriot who, whilst just towards his own people, was unjust to others, who blinded himself to the merits of foreigners and took for perfections the vices of his own country. So one sees that patriotism gave birth to localism, to the family spirit, and finally to egoism. Thus the origin of states or governments of civil society was the seed of discord, and patriotism found its punishment in itself. Diminish, do away with this love of country, and men will once more learn to know and love each other as men. There will be no more partiality. The ties between hearts will unroll and extend. In these words, the purest expression of internationalism as it is expounded today, Weishaupt displayed an ignorance of primeval conditions of life as profound as that of Rousseau. The idea of the Paleolithic man, whose skeleton is usually exhumed with a flint instrument or other weapon of warfare grasped in his hand, passing his existence in a state of universal love, is simply ludicrous. It was not, however, in his diatribes against civilization that Weishaupt surpassed Rousseau, but in the plan he devised for overthrowing it. Rousseau had merely paved the way for revolution. Weishaupt constructed the actual machinery of revolution itself. It was on the 1st of May 1776 that Weishaupt's 5 years of meditation resulted in his founding the secret society that he named, after bygone philosophical systems, the Illuminati. Web 11 through 12 and 13. Abolition of religion, absolute obedience. The grades of the order were a combination of the grades of Freemasonry and the degrees belonging to the Jesuits. Weishaupt, as has already been said, detested the Jesuits, but recognizing the efficiency of their methods in acquiring influence over the minds of their disciples, he conceived the idea of adopting their system to his own purpose. He admired, says the Abbe Beruel, the institutions of the founders of this order. He admired above all those laws that regime of the Jesuits, which under one head made so many men dispersed all over the universe tend towards the same object. He felt that one might imitate their methods whilst proposing to himself views diametrically opposed. He said to himself, "What all these men have done for altars and empires, why should I not do against altars and empires? By the attraction of mysteries, of legends, of adepts, why should I not destroy in the dark what they erect in the light of day?" It was in the training of adepts that Weishaupt showed his profound subtlety. Proselytes were not to be admitted at once to the secret aims of Illuminism, but initiated step by step into the higher mysteries, and the greatest caution was to be exercised not to reveal to the novice doctrines that might likely to revolt him. For this purpose, the initiators must acquire the habit of talking backwards and forwards, so as not to commit themselves. One must speak, Weishaupt explained to the superiors of the order, sometimes in one way, sometimes in another, so that our real purpose should remain impenetrable to our inferiors. Thus, to certain novices, the novices écossais, the Illuminati must profess to disapprove of revolutions and demonstrate the advantages of proceeding by peaceful methods towards the attainment of world domination. The passage then goes on to say vaguely that this is not the case, and that the order only demands of the initiate the fulfillment of his obligations. Nor must antagonism to religion be admitted. On the contrary, Christ was to be represented as the first author of Illuminism, whose secret mission was to restore all men the original liberty and equality that they had lost in the fall. No one, the novice should be told, paved so sure a way for liberty as our Grand Master Jesus of Nazareth. And if Jesus exhorted his disciples to despise riches, it was in order to prepare the world for that community of goods that should do away with property. Web 13 through 14. Novices initiated step by step into the higher mysteries. It was not, then, until his admission to the higher grades that the adept was initiated into the real intentions of Illuminism with regard to religion. When he reached the grade of illuminated major or minor, of Scotch knight, epopte, or priest, he was told the whole secret of the order in a discourse by the initiator. Remember that from the first invitations which we have given you in order to attract you to us, we commenced by telling you that in the projects of our order there did not enter any designs against religion. You remember that such an assurance was given you when you were admitted into the ranks of our novices, and that it was repeated when you entered into our Minerval Academy. You remember with what art, with what simulated respect we have spoken to you of Christ and of his gospel. But in the grades of greater Illuminism, of Scotch Knight and the Epopte or priest, how we have to know to form from Christ's gospel that of our reason, and from its religion that of nature, and from religion, reason, morality, and nature, to make the religion and morality of the rights of man, of equality, and of liberty. We have had many prejudices to overcome in you before being able to persuade you that the pretended religion of Christ was nothing else than the work of priests, of imposture, and of tyranny. If it be so with that religion so much proclaimed and admired, what are we to think of other religions? Understand then that they have all the same fictions for their origin, that they are equally founded on lying, error, chimera, and imposture. Behold our secret. If in order to destroy all Christianity, all religion, we have pretended to have the sole true religion, remember that the end justifies the means, and that the wise ought to take all the means to do good, which the wicked take to do evil. Those which we have taken to deliver you, those which we have taken to deliver one day the human race from all religion, are nothing else than a pious fraud, which we reserve to unveil one day in the grade of magus or philosopher illuminated. But all this was unknown to the novice, whose confidence being won by the simulation of religion was enjoined to strict obedience. Among the questions put to him were the following: if you came to discover anything wrong or unjust to be done under the order, what line would you take? Will you and can you regard the good of the order as your own good? Will you give our secret society the right of life and death? Do you bind yourself to absolute and unreserved obedience? And do you know the force of this undertaking? By way of warning as to the consequences of betraying the order, a forcible illustration was included in the ceremony of initiation. Taking a naked sword from the table, the initiator held the point against the heart of the novice with these words: if you are only a traitor and a perjurer, learn that all our brothers are called upon to arm themselves against you. Do not hope to escape or to find a place of safety. Wherever you are, shame, remorse, and the rage of our brothers will pursue you and torment you to the innermost recesses of your entrails. It will thus be seen that the liberty vaunted by the leaders of the Illuminati had no existence, and that iron discipline was in reality the watchword of the order. A great point impressed upon the adepts, of which we shall see the importance later, was that they should not be known as Illuminati. This rule was particularly enforced in the case of those described as enrollers. Women were to be used and fools with money. Women were also to be enlisted as Illuminati by being given hints of emancipation. Through women, wrote Weishaupt, one may often work the best in the world. To insinuate ourselves with these and to win them over should be one of our cleverest studies. More or less they can all be led towards change by vanity, curiosity, sensuality, and inclination. From this one can draw much profit for the good cause. This sex has a large part of the world in its hands. The female adepts were then to be divided into two classes, each with its own secret. The first to consist of virtuous women who would give it an air of respectability to the order. The second of light women, who would help to satisfy those brothers who have a penchant for pleasure. But the present utility of both classes would consist in providing funds for the society. Fools with money, whether men or women, were to be particularly welcomed. These good people, wrote Spartacus to Ajax and Cato, swell our numbers and fill our money box. Set yourselves to work. These gentlemen must be made to nibble at the bait, but let us beware of telling them our secrets. This sort of people must always be made to believe that the grade they have reached is the last. 15 through 16. System of universal spying. Espionage formed a large part of Weishaupt's program. The adepts known as the Insinuating Brothers were enjoined to assume the role of observers and reporters. Every person shall be made a spy on another and on all around him. Friends, relations, enemies, those who are indifferent, all without exception shall be made the object of his inquiries. He shall attempt to discover their strong side and their weak, their passions, their prejudices, their connections, above all, their actions. In a word, the most detailed information about them. All this is to be entered on tablets that the insinuant carries with him, and from which he shall draw up reports to be sent in twice a month to his superiors, so that the order may know which are the people in each town and village to whom it can look for support. 16. Anti-science and civilization in general. Sciences are, quote, the complicated needs of a state contrary to nature, the inventions of vain and empty brains, sent, quote, apostles. Beruel the 4th, 9. From the first year of his Illuminism, Weishaupt's, in his atrocious impiety, aping the God of Christianity, he conceived in these terms the orders he would give to Mazenhausen to propagate his new gospel. Did not Jesus Christ send forth his apostles to preach throughout the universe? You who are my Peter, why would I allow you to be idle and quiet at home? Go then and preach. Martinism also important. 1775, quote, Saint Martin called liberty, equality, fraternity the sacred ternary. In the book of Saint Martin, Des Erreurs et de la Vérité, published in 1775, the formula liberty, equality, and fraternity is referred to as la ternaire sacrée. The Martinistes, frequently referred to in French contemporary records as the Illuminés, were in reality dreamers and fanatics, and must not be confounded with the order of the Illuminati of Bavaria that came into existence 22 years later. It is by this terrible and formidable sect that the gigantic plan of world revolution was worked out under the leadership of the man whom Louis Blanc has truly described as the profoundest conspirator that has ever existed. Weishaupt. C. 1782 Congress of Wilhelmsbad. Illuminism and Freemasonry united to pursue common end, claiming 3 million members. Quote on Tragic Secret, Webster, page 19. But it was not until the Congrès de Wilhelmsbad that the alliance between Illuminism and Freemasonry was finally sealed. This assembly, of which the importance of the subsequent history of the world has never been appreciated by historians, met for the first time on the 16th of July, 1782, and included representatives of all the secret societies, Martinistes, as well as Freemasons and Illuminati, which now numbered no less than 3 million members all over the world. Amongst these different orders, the Illuminati of Bavaria alone had formulated a definite plan of campaign, and it was they who henceforward took the lead. What passed at this terrible Congress will never be known to the outside world, for even those men who had been drawn unwittingly into the movement, and now heard for the first time the real designs of their leaders, were under oath to reveal nothing. One such honest Freemason, the Comte de Verrue, a member of a Martiniste lodge at Lyons, returning from the Congrès de Wilhelmsbad, could not conceal his alarm, and when questioned on the, quote, tragic secrets he had brought back with him, replied, "I will not confide them to you. I can only tell you that all this is very much more serious than you think. The conspiracy which is being woven is so well thought out that it will be, so to speak, impossible for the monarchy and the church to escape from it." From this time onwards, the Comte de Verrue could only speak of Freemasonry with horror. D. 1784. Elector of Bavaria prohibited all secret societies. 1785 Illuminati arrested and tried and their documents publicized. Recipes for bombs, description of the goal. Webster, 25. Public opinion had now, however, become thoroughly roused on the subject of the society, and the Elector of Bavaria, informed of the danger to the state constituted by its adepts, who were said to have declared that the Illuminati must in time rule the world, published an edict forbidding all secret societies. In April of the following year, 1785, 4 other Illuminati, disgusted by the tyranny of Weishaupt, were summoned before a court of inquiry to give an account of the doctrines and methods of the sect. The evidence of these men left no further room for doubt as to the diabolical nature of Illuminism. All religion, they declared, all love of country and loyalty to sovereigns were to be annihilated. A favorite maxim of the order being, "Tu les rois et tu les prêtres sont des fripons et les traiteurs." Moreover, every effort was to be made to create discord not only between princes and their subjects, but between ministers and their secretaries, and even between parents and children, whilst suicide was to be encouraged by inculcating in men's minds the idea that the act of killing oneself afforded a certain voluptuous pleasure. Espionage was to be extended even to the post by placing adepts in the post offices who possessed the art of opening letters and closing them again without fear of detection. Robinson, who studied all the evidence of the four professors, thus sums up the plan of Weishaupt as revealed by them. The order of the Illuminati adjured Christianity and advocated sensual pleasures. In the lodge's death was declared an eternal sleep. Patriotism and loyalty were called narrow-minded prejudices and incompatible with universal benevolence. Further, they accounted all princes usurpers and tyrants, and all privileged orders as their abettors. They meant to abolish the laws which protected property accumulated by long-continued and successful industry, and to prevent for the future any such accumulation. They intended to establish universal liberty and equality, the imprescriptible rights of man, and as necessary preparations for all this, they intended to root out all religion and ordinary morality, and even to break the bonds of domestic life, by destroying the veneration for marriage vows, and by taking the education of children out of the hands of the parents. Reduced to a simple formula, the aims of the Illuminati may be summarized in the following 6 points. 1. Abolition of monarchy and all ordered government. 2. Abolition of private property. 3. Abolition of inheritance. 4. Abolition of patriotism. 5. Abolition of the family, i.e., marriage and all morality, and the institution of the communal education of children. 6. Abolition of all religion. Now it will surely be admitted that the above forms a program hitherto unprecedented in the history of civilization. Communistic theories had been held by isolated thinkers or groups of thinkers since the days of Plato, but no one, as far as we know, had ever yet seriously proposed to destroy everything for which civilization stands. Moreover, when, as we shall see, the plan of Illuminism as codified by the above 6 points has continued up to the present day to form the exact program of the world revolution, how can we doubt that the whole movement originated with the Illuminati or with secret influences at work behind them? It was on the 11th of October 1786 that the Bavarian authorities descended upon the house of Zwack and seized the documents which laid bare the methods of the conspirators. Here were found descriptions of a strong box for safeguarding papers which, if forced open, should blow up by means of an infernal machine, of a combustion which should blind or kill if squirted in the face, of a method for counterfeiting seals, for poisonous perfumes that would fill a bedroom with pestilential vapors, and for a tea to procure abortion. A eulogy of atheism entitled Better Than Horace was also discovered, and a paper in the handwriting of Zwack describing the plan for enlisting women in the 2 classes mentioned above. It will be of great service and procure much information and money, and will suit charmingly the taste of many of our truest members who are lovers of the sex. It should consist of 2 classes, the virtuous and the freer-hearted. They must not know of each other, and must be under the direction of men, but without knowing it, through good books, and the latter class, through the indulging of their passions in concealment. The fearful danger presented by the Illuminati now became apparent, and the government of Bavaria, judging that the best manner of conveying a warning to the civilized world would be to allow the papers to speak for themselves, ordered them to be published forthwith and circulated as widely as possible. A copy of this publication, entitled Original Writings of the Order of the Illuminati, was then forwarded to every government of Europe, but, strange to say, attracted little attention, as the Abbe Baruel points out, that the extravagance of the scheme therein propounded rendered it unbelievable, and the rulers of Europe, refusing to take Illuminism seriously, put it aside as a chimera. C. The Revolution. 1. Calling of STS Gen because of financial difficulties. The pretext for Enlightenment ideas to work. The revolution was radical from the beginning and had immense support from the, quote, spirit of the age. Wordsworth. Bliss was it in that scene to be alive, but to be young was very heavenly. 2. Jacobins. Took the lead from the beginning, the only real party. Agreed beforehand on policy in National Assembly. Well organized. 406 affiliated societies in the provinces with 500,000 members by 1793. They take control. Power from secret societies. Baruel 4, 1-2. Conceived not many years before the Revolution, in the thoughts of a man whose total ambition seemed absorbed in Ingolstadt and the chalk dust of schools. How is it that Illuminism, in less than 20 years, became that formidable sect which, under the name of Jacobins, counts today as its trophies so many altars fallen to pieces, so many scepters broken or mangled, so many constitutions overturned, so many nations subjugated, so many potentates fallen under its daggers or its poisons or its executioners, so many other potentates humiliated beneath the yoke of a servitude called, quote, peace, or of a servitude even more dishonorable called, quote, alliance. Under this same name of Jacobins, swallowing up simultaneously all the secrets, all the conspiracies, all the sects of sworn infidels, of seditious plotters, of disorganizing plotters, how is it that Illuminism sets up such a dominion of fear that, holding the universe in dismay, it permits not a single king to say, "Tomorrow I will still be king," and not a single people, "Tomorrow I will still have my laws and my religion"? Not a single citizen, "Tomorrow both my fortune and my home will still be mine. Tomorrow I will not awaken beneath the tree of liberty on the one side, and the tree of death, the ravenous guillotine on the other." Invisible authors, how is it that the secret adepts of modern-day Spartacus alone preside at all the crimes, at all the disasters of this plague of brigandage and of ferocity called revolution? How do they still preside over all that the sect plans, in order to consummate the desolation and dissolution of human societies? The Jacobins' orders were instantly obeyed, Baruel 4, 337. They drink each other's blood to the death of kings. Western fall of monarchy in 1792, destruction begins in earnest. I found the letter. It was composed in these terms. Your letter, my dear friend, has been read in presence of the whole club. It was surprising to find so much philosophy in a village curate. Never fear, my dear curate. We are 300. We mark the heads and they fall. As for that of which you speak, it is not time yet. Only keep your people ready, dispose your parishioners to execute the orders, and they shall be given to you in time. This letter was signed Dietrich, Secretary. To the reflections which this letter suggests, I shall add only that the club from where it was sent has changed the place of its meetings to go to the suburb of Ste Honore, and that there it remained unknown to the court until the moment of one of these orgies, whose object would be to gain a prize the king of the fate that awaited him. After one of these repasts, celebrated in the name of fraternity, all the brothers would prick their arms and drain their blood into their glass. All would drink of this blood, after having cried, "Death to the kings." And this would be the last toast of their fraternal repast. This letter tells us also which men formed this legion of the 1200, which John de Brie proposed to establish at the convention, whose goal was to be spread into the empires to assassinate all the kings of the earth. 3. Violence. The usual interpretation. Incidental passions aroused, national defense, etc. But evidence points to deliberate use. When there are real grievances, they are exploited by clever politicians to promote the revolution. Great role of agitators. 1. The Great Fear. July 1789. Born, page 100. Web 32 through 33. To whatever agency we attribute it, however, the mechanism of the French Revolution distinguishes it from all previous revolutions. Hitherto, the isolated revolutions that had taken place throughout the history of the world can be clearly recognized as spontaneous movements brought about by oppression or by a political faction enjoying some measure of popular support, and therefore endeavoring to satisfy the demands of the people. But in the French Revolution we see for the first time that plan in operation which had been carried on right up to the present moment, the systematic attempt to create grievances in order to exploit them. The most remarkable instance of engineered agitation during the early stages of the Revolution was the extraordinary incident known to history as the Great Fear, when on the same day, July 22nd, 1789, and almost at the same hour, in towns and villages all over France, a panic was created by the announcement that all brigands were approaching, and therefore that all good citizens must take up arms. The messengers who brought the news post-haste on horseback in many cases exhibited placards headed "Edict of the King," bearing the words, "The King orders all chateaux to be burned down. He only wishes to keep his own." And the people, obedient to these commands, seized upon every weapon they could find and set themselves to the task of destruction. The object of the conspirators was thus achieved, the arming of the populace against law and order, a device which ever since 1789 has always formed the first item in the program of the social revolution. Protest of Women, October 5th, 1789. Women also dressed as men, many forced to go along. Number 2. The Reign of Terror under Robespierre, ostensibly invoked by foreign invasion, seeking enemies of the people inside. This means of governing communism. But deeper, there was a little publicized plan of depopulation. Report of the Committee of Public Safety, August 8th, 1795. Be peaceful. France has enough for 12 million men. All the rest will have to be put to death, which was 12 million. and then you will no longer lack for bread. Beruel 4, page 335. It was she, the sect, that extinguished even the affection of a brother for his brother, of the child for his father, when the adept Shanir, at the sight of a brother delivered over to executioners, coolly replied, "If my brother is not in the sentiment of the revolution, let him be sacrificed." When the adept Philip brought in triumph to the Jacobins the head of his father and mother. This is the sect always insatiable for blood, which by the mouth of Marat demanded yet 270,000 heads, which before long could only be counted by millions. She, the sect, knew it. All the secrets of its equality could only be accomplished in the greatest events by depopulating the world. And the sect which replied through Lebeau to the communes of Montauban, terrified for want of provisions, "Never fear, France has enough for 12 million men. It is necessary that the rest, that is, the other 12 million Frenchmen, must be put to death, and then you will no longer lack bread." Report of the Committee of Public Safety, meeting of August 8, 1775. Revolutionary Tribunal discussed reduction of population to 1/3 or 1/2. Committee of Public Safety calculated how many heads to have in each town and district, drowned, guillotined, or shot, perhaps 300,000, of which only 3,000 nobles, most peasants and workers. At Nantes, 500 children of poor people were killed in one butchery. 144 poor women thrown into the river, etc. 3. Killings and destruction especially fierce. September 1792 massacres of priests and others in prisons, cannibalism and torture. The violence calculated and Marx's idea. Sieyès replies. Beruel 4, 335. You speak to us always of our means. Monsieur, it is the end, it is the object and the goal that one must learn to see. Saint Just, I will walk willingly with my feet in blood and tears, said Robespierre's coadjutor, Saint Just. And this, whether he admits or not, must be the maxim of every revolutionary socialist who believes that any methods are justifiable for the attainment of his end. 4. Babeuf. Conspiracy of the Equals. A. Disciple of Weishaupt, followed Robespierre's communist ideas, said population was the immense secret of the terror, claimed it took 1 million lives, formed his own Masonic organization for bringing about, quote, equality, a communist. Webb 56. Unfortunately, the confusion of mind prevailing amongst the advocates of equality was so great that the meetings, which long before consisted of 2,000 people, became like a Tower of Babel. No one knew precisely what he wanted, and no decisions could be reached. It was therefore decided to supplement these huge assemblies by small secret committees. And here the scheme of social revolution was elaborated. Starting from the premise that all property is theft, it was decided that the process known in revolutionary language as expropriation must take place. That is to say, all property must be wrested from its present owners by force, the force of an armed mob. But Babeuf, while advocating violence and tumult as the means to an end, in no way desired anarchy as a permanent solution. The state must be maintained, and not only maintained, but made absolute, the sole dispenser of the necessities of life. In my system of common happiness, he wrote, I desire that no individual property shall exist. The land is God's, and its fruits belong to all men in general. Another, Babao Viste, the Marquis de Antoinelle, formerly a member of the Revolutionary Tribunal, had expressed the matter in much of the same words. The state of communism is the only just, the only good one. Without this state of things, no peaceful and really happy societies can exist. April 1796, finished his Manifesto of Equals, Web 57 through 58. Babeuf then decided that a secret directorate must be formed, of which the workers bear a curious resemblance to those of the Illuminati. Thus, Weishaupt had employed 12 leading adepts to direct operations throughout Germany, and had strictly enjoined his followers not to be known even to each other as Illuminati. So Babeuf now instituted 12 principal agents to work the different districts of Paris, and these men were not even to know the names of those who formed the Central Committee of Four, but only to communicate with them through intermediaries, partially initiated into the secrets of the conspiracy. Like Weishaupt also, Babeuf adopted a domineering and arrogant tone toward his subordinates, and any whom he suspected of treachery were threatened, after the manner of the secret societies, with the direst vengeance. Woe to those of whom we have cause to complain, he wrote to one whose zeal had begun to doubt. Reflect that true conspirators can never relinquish those they have once decided to employ. By April 1796, the plan of insurrection was complete, and the famous Manifesto of the Equals was drawn up and ready for publication. People of France, this proclamation announced, for 15 centuries you have lived in slavery and consequently in unhappiness. For 6 years, during the course of the Revolution, you have hardly drawn breath, waiting for independence, for happiness, and equality. Equality, the first desire of nature, the first need of man, and the principal bond of all legal association. Well, we intend henceforth to live and to die equal, as we were born. We wish for real equality or death. That is what we must have. And we will have this real equality, no matter at what price. Woe to those who interpose themselves between it and us. Roofs of our houses, we will consent to anything for that, to make a clean sweep so as to hold to that only. Perish if necessary, all the arts provided, that real equality is left to us. The agrarian law and the division of lands were the momentary wish of a few soldiers without principle, moved by instinct rather than by reason. We tend to something more sublime and equitable, the common happiness or the community of goods. No more private property in land. The land belongs to no one, we claim. We wish for the communal enjoyment of the fruits of the earth. The fruits of the earth belong to everyone. We declare that we can no longer endure that the great majority of men should work and sweat in the service and for the good pleasure of an extreme minority. Long enough and too long have less than 1 million individuals disposed of what belongs to more than 20 millions of their fellowmen, of their equals. Let it cease at last, this great scandal in which our nephews will not be able to believe. Vanish at last revolting distinctions of rich and poor, of great and small, of masters and servants, of governors and governed. Let there be no other difference between men than that of age and sex. Since all have the same needs and the same faculties, let there be only one education, one kind of food. They content themselves with one sun and air for all. Why should not the same portion and the same quality of food suffice for each of them? People of France, we say to you, the holy enterprise that we are organizing has no other object but to put forth an end to civil dissensions and to public misery. Never has a more vast design been conceived and executed. From time to time, a few men of genius, a few sages have spoken in a low and trembling voice. Not one of them has had the courage to tell the whole truth. The moment for great measures has arrived. The evil is at its height. It covers the face of the earth. Chaos under the name of politics has reigned for too many centuries. The moment has come to found the Republic of the Equals, the great hostel open to all men. Groaning families, come and seat yourselves at the common table set up by nature for all her children. People of France, open your eyes and heart to the plenitude of happiness. Recognize and proclaim with us the Republic of Equals. This document was destined, however, not to be displayed to the eyes of the public, for the secret committee finally decided that it would be inexpedient to admit the people into the whole plan of the conspiracy. Particularly did they judge it inadvisable to publish the phrase which had been expressed in almost identical language by Weishaupt: "Perish all the arts, provided that real equality is left to us." The people of France were not to know that a return to barbarism was contemplated. Accordingly, a second proclamation was framed under the title of Analysis of the Doctrine of Babeuf, a far less inspiring appeal than the former manifesto, and mainly unintelligible to the working classes, yet, as M. Fleury remarks, the veritable Bible or Koran of the despotic system known as communism. For herein lies the crux of the matter. No one reading these two documents of the Bobovistes can fail to recognize the truth of certain of their structures on society. The glaring disparity between poverty and riches, the uneven distribution of work and pleasure, the injustice of an industrial system whereby, owing largely at this period to the suppression of trade unions by the revolutionary leaders, employers could live in luxury by sweated labor. But the point is, how did Babeuf propose to redress these evils? Briefly, then, his system, founded on the doctrine of community of goods and of labor, may be summarized as follows. Everyone must be forced to work so many hours a day in return for equal remuneration. The man who showed himself more skillful or industrious than his fellows would be recompensed merely by public gratitude. This compulsory labor was in fact not to be paid for in money, but in kind. For, since the right to private property constituted the principal evil of existing society, the distinction of mine and thine must be abolished, and no one should be allowed to possess anything of his own. Payment could only therefore be made in the products of labor, which were all to be collected in huge communal stores and doled out in equal rations to the workers. Inevitably, commerce would be entirely done away with, and money was no longer to be coined or admitted to the country. Foreign trade must therefore be carried on by coin now in circulation, and when that was exhausted, by a system of barter. But people were not informed of this, a la Weishaupt. told only that the goods of the enemies of the people would be given to the needy. But the people were not in the secret of the movement. Just as in the great outbreaks of the revolution, the mob of Paris has been driven blindly forward on false pretexts supplied by the agitators. So once again the people were to be made the instruments of their own ruin. The secret committee of direction well knew that communism was a system that would never appeal to the people. They were careful, therefore, not to admit their dupes among the working classes into the whole of their program. And believing that it was only by an appeal to self-interest and covetousness they could secure a following, they skillfully played on the people's passions, promising them booty they had no intention of bestowing on them. Thus, in the Insurrectional Act, now drawn up by the committee, it was announced that the goods of the émigrés, of the conspirators, i.e., the royalists, and the enemies of the people, were to be distributed to the defenders of the country and the needy. They did not tell them that in reality these things were to belong to no one, but to become the property of the state, administered by themselves. The people then were not to be allowed to know the truth about the cause in which they were asked to shed their blood, and they would be obliged to shed it in torrents no sane man could doubt. His admiration for Robespierre, Web 64. When it came to organizing the required insurrection, Babeuf adopted a very different kind of language. In fact, the former denouncer of Robespierre's system of depopulation now asserted that not only Robespierre's aims, but his methods were to be commended. I confess today that I bear a grudge against myself for having formerly seen the revolutionary government and Robespierre and Saint Just in such black colors. I think these men alone were worth all the revolutionaries put together, and that their dictatorial government was devilishly well thought out. I do not at all agree that they committed great crimes and made many republicans perish. Not so many, I think. The salvation of 25 millions of men must not be weighed against consideration for a few equivocal individuals. A regenerator must take a wide outlook. He must mow down everything that thwarts him, everything that obstructs his passage, everything that can impede his prompt arrival at the goal on which he has determined. Rascals or imbeciles, or presumptuous people, or those who eager for glory. It is all the same. So much the pity for them. What are they there for? Robespierre knew all that, and is partly what makes me admire him. But where Babeuf showed himself the intellectual inferior of Robespierre was in the way he proposed to overcome resistance to his plan of a socialist state. Robespierre, as he well knew, had spent 14 months mowing down those that had obstructed his passage, and had kept the guillotine unremittingly at work in Paris and the provinces, yet even then had not succeeded in silencing objectors. But Babeuf hoped to accomplish his purpose in one day, that great day of the people, wherein all opposition should be instantly suppressed, the whole existing social order annihilated, and the Republic of Equality erected on its ruins. If, however, the process were to be brief, it must necessarily be all the more violent, and it was thus with none of the calm precision of Robespierre marking down heads for destruction that Babeuf set about his task. His frenzy. Web 65. When writing out his plans of insurrection, his secretary Pillet afterwards related at his trial, Babeuf would rush up and down the room with flaming eyes, mouthing and grimacing, hitting himself against the furniture, knocking over the chairs whilst uttering hoarse cries of, "To arms! To arms! The insurrection! The insurrection is beginning!" "It was an insurrection against the chairs," said Pillet drily. Then Babeuf would fling himself upon his pen, plunge it into the ink, and write with fearful rapidity, whilst his whole body trembled, and the perspiration poured from his brow. It was no longer madness, added Pillet, it was frenzy. This frenzy, Babeuf explained, was necessary in order to work himself up to the required degree of eloquence, and in his appeals to insurrection, it was difficult to see where his program differed from the brigandage and violence he had deprecated. The Great Day of Revolution, Web 67 through 68. The following program for the Great Day was now drawn up by the secret directory. At a given moment, the Revolutionary Army was to march on the Legislative Assembly, on the headquarters of the army, and on the houses of the ministers. The best trained troops were to be sent to the arsenals and the munition factories, and also to the camps of Vincennes and Grenelle, in the hope that the 8,000 men encamped there would join in the movement. Meanwhile, orators were to hold forth to the soldiers, and women were to present them with refreshment and civic wreaths. In the event of their remaining proof against those seductions, the streets were to be barricaded, and stones, bricks, boiling water, and vitriol thrown down on the heads of the troops. All supplies for the capital were then to be seized and placed under the control of the leaders. At the same time, the wealthier classes were to be driven from their houses, which were immediately to be converted into lodgings for the poor. The members of the Directory were then to be butchered, likewise all citizens who offered any resistance to the insurgents. The insurrection thus happily terminated, as Babeuf naively expressed it, the whole people were to be assembled in the Place de la Révolution and invited to cooperate in the choice of their representatives. The plan, writes Buonarroti, was to talk to the people without reserve and without digressions, and to render the most impressive homage to its sovereignty. But lest the people perchance, blinded to its truest interests, might fail to recognize its saviors in the person of the conspirators, the Babouvistites proposed to follow up their homage of the people's sovereignty by demanding that executive power should be exclusively confided to themselves. For, as Buonarroti observed, at the beginning of the revolution it is necessary, even out of respect for the real sovereignty of the people, to occupy oneself less with the wishes of the nation than to place supreme authority in strongly revolutionary hands. Once in these hands, it would of course remain there, and the Babovistes, with all the civil and military forces at their back, would be able to impose their system of state serfdom on the submissive people. Violence. 70. At a meeting of the committee, there was read aloud the finished plan of insurrection, to which further atrocious details had been added. Everyone attempting to exercise any authority was instantly to be put to death. The armorers were to be forced to give up their arms, the bakers their supplies of bread, and those who resisted hoisted to the nearest lantern. The same fate was reserved for all wine and spirit merchants, who might refuse to provide the brandy needed to inflame the populace and drive them into violence. All reflection on the part of the people must be avoided, ran the written directions to the leaders. They must commit acts which will prevent them from going back. Amongst the whole of this ferocious band, Rossignol, the former general of the revolutionary armies in La Vendée, showed himself the most bloodthirsty. "I will not have anything to do with your insurrection," he cried, "unless, heads fall like hail, unless it inspires so great a terror that it makes the whole universe shudder. A discourse that met with unanimous applause. The 11th of May had been fixed for the great day of explosion, when not only Paris, but all the cities of France, worked on by the agents of Babeuf, were to rise and overthrow the whole structure of civilization. Meanwhile, there was an informant, and the government, warned of the impending attack, was ready to meet it. On the morning of the day appointed, a placard was found posted up on all the walls of Paris bearing these words: The Executive Directory to the Citizens of Paris. Citizens, a frightful plot is to break out this night or tomorrow at the dawn of day. A band of thieves and murderers has formed the project of butchering the Legislative Assembly, all the members of the government, the staff of the army, and all constituted authorities in Paris. The Constitution of '93 is to be proclaimed. This proclamation is to be the signal for a general pillage of Paris, of houses and much of the stores and shops, and the massacre of a great number of citizens is to be carried out at the same time. But be reassured, good citizens, the government is watching. It knows the leaders of the plot and their methods. Be calm, therefore, and carry on your ordinary business. The government has taken infallible measures for outwitting their schemes, and for giving them up with their partisans to the vengeance of the law. Then, without further warning, the police burst into the house where Babeuf and Buronati were drawing up a rival placard calling the people to revolt. In the midst of their task, the arm of the law surprised and seized them, and on the following morning 45 other leaders of the conspiracy were arrested, likewise, and thrown into the Abbaye. Alas for the support they had hoped from the populace! The revolutionary army on which they had counted, impressed as the people always are by a display of authority, went over to the police in support of law and order. With the removal of the agitators, the whole populace came to their senses and realized the full horror of the plot into which they had been inveigled. Napoleon averted them and ended the last great attempt in French Revolution to realize the aim of Illuminism. 5. Revolutionaries devoured each other. Beruel 4, 338 through 39. Christ had no more altar in France. The kings had no more throne. Those who had destroyed the altar and the throne conspired against each other. The intruders, the atheists, and the deists slaughtered the Catholics. The intruders, the atheists, and the deists slaughtered one another. The constitutionalists pursued the royalists. The republicans pursued the constitutionalists. The Democrats of the one and indivisible republic butchered the Democrats of the Federate Republic. The faction of the mountain guillotined the faction of the Gironde. The faction of the mountain divided into the faction of Herbert and of Marat, into the faction of Danton and of Chabot, into the faction of Cloutz and of Chaumet, into the faction of Robespierre, which devoured them all, and which would be in its turn devoured by the faction of Tallien and of Fr Herman. Brisset and Jesson, Gaudet, Fachette, Rabond, Barbaroux, and 30 others were sentenced by Fouquier Tinville as they had passed sentence on Louis XVI. Fouquier Tinville was himself judged as he judged Brisset. Pétion and Bazou, wandering in the forest, perished consumed by hunger, devoured by beasts. Perrin died in chains. Condorcet poisoned himself in prison. Valage and Labat stabbed themselves. Marat was murdered by Charlotte Corday. Robespierre is no more. Of them, Sieyès still remains, because France must yet have its plagues. Lianifer, to establish the reign of his impiety, Lesiel, to punish him for it, gave her, France, under the name of directors, her 5 tyrants or her pentarches, and her double senate, Rubel, Canor, Barras, Letior, La Revelière, La Pau, rob her of her weapons, drive out the deputies of her equality and her liberty, batter her sections with cannon and mortars, squeeze her in his clutches, and cause to hang upon her a yoke of iron. All tremble before them, they are frightened, envying one another, withdrawing from one another, only allowing new tyrants to arrive and join together. The deportations, the stupor, the terror, and these pentarchs, at this moment those are the gods who rule over France. The silence of the terror in her empire, where her vast prison, 20 million slaves all dumb with terror under the shaft, at the mere name of La Guyane, of Merlin, or of Rubel. Behold this people so often proclaimed equal and free and sovereign. France ruined by revolution. Webster 49 through 50. The condition of France at the end of the terror. France is demoralized. She is exhausted. This is the last trait of this country in ruins. There is no longer any public opinion, or rather, this opinion is made up only of hatred. They hate the directors, members of the directory, and they hate the deputies. They hate the terrorists, and they hate the Chouans, the royalists of La Vendée. They hate the rich, and they hate the anarchists. They hate the revolution, and they hate the counter-revolution. But where hatred reaches paroxysm is in the case of the newly rich. What is the good of having destroyed kings, nobles, and aristocrats, since deputies, farmers, and tradesmen take their place? What cries of hatred! Of all the ruins found and increased by the Directory, ruins of parties, ruins of power, ruins of homes, ruins of consciences, ruins of intellects, there is nothing more pitiable than this, the ruin of national character. 8 years after ending the terror, France had not yet recovered from its ravages. According to Redhead York, even the usually accepted theory of agricultural prosperity is erroneous. Nothing can exceed the wretchedness of the implements of husbandry employed, but the wretched appearance of the persons using them. Women at the plow and young girls driving a team give but an indifferent idea of the progress of agriculture under the Republic. There are no farmhouses dispersed over the fields. The farmers reside together in remote villages, a circumstance calculated to retard the business of cultivation. The interiors of the houses are filthy, the farmyards in the utmost disorder, and the miserable condition of the cattle sufficiently bespeaks the poverty of the owner. Everywhere beggars assailed the travelers for alms. In spite of the reduced population, unemployment was rife, education was at a standstill, and owing to the destruction of the old nobility and clergy, and the fact that the new rich who occupied their estates were absentee landlords, there was no system of organized charity. York is finally driven to declare, "The revolution, which was brought about ostensibly for the benefit of the lower classes of society, has sunk them to a degree of degradation and misfortune to which they were never reduced under the ancient monarchy. They have been disinherited, stripped, and deprived of every resource for existence, except defeats of arms and the fleeting spoil of vanquishing nations." In another passage, York asks the inevitable question that arises in the minds of all thinking contemporaries. France still bleeds at every pore. She is a vast mourning family, clad in sackcloth. It is impossible at this time for a contemplative mind to be gay in France. At every footstep, the merciless and sanguinary root of fanatical barbarians disgust the sight and sicken humanity. On all sides, ruins obtrude themselves on the eye and compel the question, for what and for whom are all this havoc and desolation? This concludes the reading of Part 2 of Lecture 6 in Orthodox Survival Course by Father Seraphim Rose and Father Podmoshensky. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and check out my social media in the description. Thank you, and God bless.